Hello everyone, Reflected here, and today I'm going to show you how to start up the Messerschmitt Bf-109K in DCS, how to taxi, take off and land. You know, lately I've seen lots of threads on the forums and questions on Facebook, and actually not only lately, about taking off in the 109. It's not easy, it's downright difficult, but it was difficult in real life too. And if you pay attention to a couple of things, it can be done with a little practice, so I'm going to help you. Also, I've seen lots of replies to those questions, even some tutorials that suggest the wrong things, so they tell you to do what should definitely not be done. So today I'm basing this tutorial on information coming from the original pilot's notes, from books and personal accounts written by Messerschmitt 109 pilots, including World War II. Also information coming from pilots today who fly restored 109s. And I filled in the gaps with my limited experience flying single engine aircraft. Of course, sadly I've never flown a 109 in real life. So let's get started. I'm using a skin that I created. These are the markings of a 109G-10 from the 101st Fighter Wing of the Royal Hungarian Air Force in World War II, the famous Puma unit. They painted red screaming Puma heads on the cowling of their 109s. By the way, the same Puma head can be observed on the nose of the Gripens that the Hungarian Air Force flies today. Anyhow, this is the aircraft of young Sergeant Mátyás Lőrinc, aka Matyi. He was an ace with 6 victories. He scored his first 3 kills on the same day. I think it was in June, again, June 16th, 1944, when he realized that 4 P-38 Lightnings latched onto his leader, and he went after them. He shot down 3 of those Lightnings, but sadly he was too late, and the 4th Lightning killed his leader, so Matyi was inconsolable. Only approximately 4 months later, he and the wing was attacking USAAF raid, attacking targets in Hungary. And usually they were outnumbered at least 10-1. So one quick pass on the bombers and then they were just trying to escape because the escorting Mustangs and Lightnings latched onto them, and this was no different on this day. And Matyi's aircraft was heavily damaged, so he had to carry out an emergency landing in a field. But because he wanted to save the aircraft, he tried to land with the wheels down, which was a big no-no against the procedures. But he tried to save the aircraft, and the wheels hit a ditch, a small ditch in the field. The aircraft nosed over, turned on its back, caught fire. Matyi was trapped and was burnt alive. He was 23 years old. I've always been fascinated by the stories of Hungarian fighter pilots in World War II. So if you want to do some further reading on the subject, make sure you pick up a copy of Forgotten Heroes. It's a wonderful collection of riveting stories about this young man. I can highly recommend it. Check it out. So here we are, sitting in the cockpit. We got strapped in with some help from the ground crew. Let's start the engine. I like to go systematically from left to right or right to left to make sure I don't forget anything. First things first, we're going to operate this big wheel and lower the flaps. There's no indication. We need 20 degrees of flaps. only these markings that you see, those lines 5, 10, and 20 degrees. The third line is 20 degrees. Okay, second wheel is the elevator trim. We're gonna move it all the way back. That's right, all the way back for startup and taxi. But for takeoff, we're gonna change it. Now it's important to note that this is not the same kind of elevator trim that you're used to when you fly Spitfires and Mustangs and Thunderbolts. So it's not a trim tab that you deflect and that creates lift upwards or downwards, thus aerodynamically helping you to deflect the elevator one way or the other. By moving this wheel forward and back, the entire tailplane, horizontal tailplane, is moving. It's changing the angle of incidence. Not just the elevator, even the fixed part. Okay, we move it all the way back, the tail heavy. Why is that? Because we want the prop wash to push down the tail as much as possible to minimize the chances of the propeller hitting the ground. That's why you usually pull the stick all the way back into your lap when you're on the ground, you taxi, especially into the wind. Okay, we correct the throttle, check the control movements. I'm going to turn on the control display indicator, whatever it's called, so you can see my inputs during flight. Okay, all working correctly. You can set the altimeter to the QNH pressure, or you can leave it at field elevation. I'm going to do that now. Then we turn on the oxygen. It's important because if you're planning to go to high altitudes, you will need oxygen. And if it doesn't work, there's no point in starting the engine. But it works. We've got pressure. And then we turn on some of the systems. Now, as a rule of thumb, I only turn on stuff that is needed. I think a ground unit just walked across my aircraft. Oh well. AI. So I only turn on stuff that is needed to start the engine. And I turn on the rest once the engine is running and it's generating power in order to preserve the battery. It may not be very important in a sim to keep your battery healthy, but in real life it is. So we turn on, let me look at the helpers. Generator, the battery, the ignition, and the electric fuel pump. That's all you need to get the engine running. Then we open the radiators. It's going to be here in the automatic position for the duration of the flight. It opens if the engine gets too hot, and it will close as much as it can to minimize drag. But on the ground, you want it fully open, because there's no airflow through the radiators and you don't want the engine to overheat. Next thing is the propeller control. So with that switch over there, you can change it from manual to automatic. For the duration of the flight, it's going to be in automatic, but for takeoff, it's recommended to have it in manual. It's because there are already too many variables and forces to fight to get off the ground. If the prop pitch is going to change and the RPM, that just adds another variable, and it's going to be more difficult for you to take off. So as per the pilot's notes, the handbook, it has to be in the manual position. And then there's this thumb switch that changes the pitch of the propeller. So the maximum value is 1230. I guess if it was a clock, it's 1230. But for takeoff, you need the 12 o'clock position. Now we'll switch it to automatic and verify that it goes back to the 1230 position. Yeah, it works. So back to manual, 12 o'clock. Good. Then we have to open the fuel pump. Oh, make sure the engine cutout, or whatever it's called, the engine stop lever, is down. If it's pulled up, that's how you stop the engine. So there are two fuel pumps, and you activate both by moving it all the way forward, this lever. Now, currently, in the current version of the open beta, there's a bug that shuts down the fuel pumps if it's moved all the way forward. So I'm going to move it almost all the way forward. Yeah, I hope it's going to work like that. Let's prime the engine. I should be seeing, yeah, I'm seeing some increase in fuel pressure. It's good. And now it's time to start the engine. Now, the starter of the 109 is very different from Allied aircraft. It doesn't have an electric starter. Actually, two of the ground crew are going to come. One stands on the right wing and the other one stands on the right wheel. They insert a piece of metal into a hole on the right side of the canopy, of the engine cowling, and they start turning it, and they start turning a big flywheel. So they engage a flywheel, and when it reaches a sufficient speed, then they remove the piece of metal, they shout clear, and that's when you can pull the starter handle. So until they are here speeding up the flywheel, I'm not going to turn on the magnetos for safety reasons. Okay, I'm going to ask the ground crew to operate the starter. You can hear the flywheel whining and revving up. Let's crack the throttle, stand on the brakes, stick fully back. Clear, magnetos on, pull the starter. And the engine is running. You want to increase the power to have approximately 500 RPM. Okay, now it's time to turn on the systems that we didn't turn on before. Only what's needed, so the IFF is not needed, radio is, wing and drop ordnance, we don't have any, UV lights, nav lights, pitot heater, we don't need that stuff now. We usually need the MW50 boost. So if you turn it on and you have your MW50 tank full, then what it does is that as you advance the throttle and it goes beyond a certain point, it mixes methanol into the fuel, and that helps the engine, that prevents the engine from overheating. If you apply full power without any methanol cooling it, then the engine is gonna tear itself apart. So without this, you don't want to go past 1.4, 1.42 ATA, atmospheric pressure. Okay, now we're just gonna wait until the engine warms up. This is the coolant temperature and the oil temperature. The lower peg is the minimum value. The engine of the 109 warms up really fast. We can actually start taxiing. So close the canopy. The cockpit of the 109 was really small. I'm 6 foot tall, so probably my shoulders would be pushing hard against the sides of the canopy, and my head would possibly touch the top, but ergonomically it was a very nice design. So I read the personal account of a pilot who was quite tall, probably even taller than me, and he said, yeah, it was uncomfortable, but he liked it because he became one with the aircraft. So in order to taxi, we need to unlock the tail wheel. This is locked, this is unlocked. The most common mistake when taxiing is using too much power and taxiing too fast. You cannot control it. The rudder surface of the 109 is just really small. It's almost inadequate. You can't really use it to turn on the ground. So I'm going to release the brakes, increase the power to 1000 RPM, and change direction with small taps on the brake, really small ones. That gets the nose turning. And once the aircraft is rolling, you can decrease power to 700-800 RPM. That's all you need. Stick fully back. Gentle taps on the brake. I'm not sure where the runway is. It's a grass airfield. See, 700 RPM and I'm taxiing fast enough. I think this is it. Gentle tap on the left brake and the aircraft turns. And then a gentle tap on the right brake. I'm going to straighten it out. You got to roll straight for a few meters before you lock the tail wheel, because you want to lock it in a straight position. Now let's stand on the brakes. We can do some checks. Increase power, and then check if the magnetos, they work separately as well. It's M2, it's M1. Yeah, the drop is around 400. I'm not sure what's the correct value, but that seems a lot more than in Allied aircraft, but yeah, this is all right. Then you need to check if the fuel pumps work separately. So pump 2 and pump 1 alone. I'm not gonna move it because of that aforementioned bug, but normally you check it. And then you change the trim to 1 division nose heavy. This is very important. The 109 doesn't have aileron or rudder trims. It has an aileron trim that can be set on the ground but not in flight. So it's a very hands-on aircraft to fly, especially because of the super powerful engine. So you constantly need to tweak your rudder and stick inputs. Now, before we take off, I'm going to walk you through what's going to happen, because it's all going to happen very fast and I'm going to be far too concentrated and busy flying the aircraft. So let's go through what happens. I've read lots of advice telling players to just slam the throttle forward, and that gives you enough airflow and prop wash over the rudder. You have proper control, directional control, but that's the biggest no-no. That was the biggest no-no in real life. On one hand, you only need 1.3 ATA manifold pressure to take off. You don't need full power. The aircraft takes off comfortably at 1.3, and any more than that just makes your job more difficult to control the aircraft. And you've got to increase power slowly but steadily. Okay, this is really important. In the personal accounts I've read, they said that whenever they heard the DB605 engine of a 109 rev up and roar up really fast, the sign of somebody slamming the throttle forward, they knew that trouble was going to happen. There was bound to be an accident. So apply power slowly but steadily. Then we pull the stick all the way back into our laps, because at the beginning of the takeoff roll, there's going to be a lot of torque and the rudder will not be working at all because it's just too small. It's too small. So your best friend and the only hope to keep the aircraft rolling straight is the tail wheel. So we want to deflect the elevator and we want the prop wash to push the tail down to engage the tail wheel as much as possible until we get enough speed where the rudder becomes efficient. We also apply full right rudder. This sometimes, depending on the wind, it may not be enough. In that case, you can, when you apply full right rudder and the nose starts to move left, starts to veer left, then you just gently tap on the brake like this. Very small tap that stops the left momentum. Don't slam the brake, just a gentle tap or two if needed. As we gather speed and there's more and more airflow over the rudder, it's going to start to bite. It's going to start to work. So you have to be prepared to ease that rudder back to keep the nose straight, because if you keep it like this, eventually the nose is going to veer to the right. You don't want that either. So be prepared to relax and ease back. And we're also going to deflect the ailerons to the right. Why is that? Now, that big propeller is turning clockwise if you're sitting in the cockpit. But it also wants to turn the aircraft counterclockwise. And this is related to the wheels not being straight and vertical. So if you look at the wheels of a 109, they are leaning inwards. And I'm sure you've tried to, when you were a kid, just took a wheel or, I don't know, a Lego wheel and rolled it, and as soon as it leaned one way, it started to turn. And it's the same here. So if there's more pressure on the right wheel than the left, then the aircraft will want to turn left, and vice versa. So the propeller wants to rotate the aircraft counterclockwise, so left wing down. That's gonna apply pressure on the left wheel, and that we want to make the aircraft veer right. So we want to keep equal pressure on the wheels and help with right aileron. Okay, we're rolling down the runway, gathering speed, easing back on the rudder, keeping the stick back. Eventually, you will want the tail to raise, but when the tail raises, the nose moves down. The gyroscopic forces will want to turn the aircraft to the left. So be prepared to apply, once again, right rudder to counter this. Anticipate that left yawing momentum as the nose comes down, the tail comes up. Also, you want to do this slow. If you do it fast and you force the tail up, you will not be able to counter that yaw. And another important thing is that don't try to lift the tail too soon when there's still not enough airflow over the rudder. So if you go fast enough, the rudder is working, that's when you can slowly raise the tail and you will be able to keep the aircraft straight with more right rudder. And as you further accelerate, the aircraft may want to take off at, I don't know, 160, 170. It can get airborne. Don't let it. Apply forward pressure on the stick and try to get at least 190, 200 kilometers an hour. Now, there's a little anecdote about this. There was a guy in the Royal Hungarian Air Force. who flew the E version of the 109, which had a much weaker engine. Then he was moved to become an instructor, and near the end of the war, he got an assignment at a frontline squadron. So they put him in a G model with a much more powerful engine, and he had to take off and do a few landings, takeoffs, to get used to the new model. And they warned him about all this that I just told you about, and he said he dismissed those who were warning him, and he said, I have lots of hours in 109, don't tell me what to do. Sure enough, he lined up on the runway, slammed the throttle forward. Everybody knew there was going to be trouble. Of course, he couldn't control the aircraft properly, and eventually he wanted to rotate at too slow a speed, where maybe an E model would have been okay, but a later G model, especially not under control, he just rotated, and the aircraft, there wasn't enough speed. The aircraft flipped on its back and crashed, and the guy was killed instantly. So don't rotate too soon. And there's just two more little advice. One from me. Take note of the horizon and where it intersects the canopy rail, because when you land, you want the same 3-point position when you flare. You don't want to pull the nose up any further than this. This is exactly what you want to see when you flare the aircraft on landing. Just remember where it intersects the canopy rail. And the other piece of advice is coming from a guy who flies restored 109s. And he says, if you can't keep the aircraft straight on takeoff and it veers to the left, to the right, just accept the new takeoff direction, and then from then on try to keep it straight. Do not, under any circumstances, try to make the nose come back to the original direction, because that's gonna create just way more trouble. I'm not talking about veering 40 degrees to the left and heading straight into that hangar. No, I'm talking about small corrections. So it's just not worth it to try to make the nose come back. Okay, deep breath. Let's give it a try. Stick fully back, right rudder. Applying power slowly but steadily up to 1.3 ATA. Gentle tap on the right brake. Ease the rudder back. It started to bite. Ease the stick forward slowly. Prepare to apply more right rudder. Keep the nose down, accelerate. And rotate. Gear up. Accelerate, accelerate. You want to climb at 270 kilometers per hour. Now, propeller control to automatic before it over revs. Radiator automatic. And let's raise the flaps fully and maintain 270 kilometers an hour. That's the best climb speed of a 109. Now, when you reach the combat zone, you will want to turn on the weapon system, adjust the brightness of the crosshair. Don't forget to flip the gun safety cover. And I've read lots of bug reports saying something's wrong with the missions because they cannot fire the cannon. Yes, you can, but there's the button at the bottom of the stick. You have to depress it for a few seconds to charge the cannons. And now you will be able to fire machine guns and the cannons. Okay, good hunting. Okay, we're back from a mission. Every self-respecting 109 pilot starts the landing procedure with a low pass. You've got to beat up the field, make a low pass for the mechanics, the ground crew, and you've got to waggle your wings once for each victory you scored. That was customary in the Luftwaffe and also in the Royal Hungarian Air Force. Let's say we scored 2 victories, mechanics will be happy. You pull up for the downwind lag. You want to decelerate to 350 kilometers an hour and climb to anywhere between 300 to 500 meters, depending on local procedures, above ground level, I mean. Okay, we're parallel to the runway, to the landing direction. At 350, you lower the landing gear and start lowering the flaps. And of course, you gotta trim the aircraft more and more tail heavy. The propeller control will stay in automatic. If for some reason you cannot use the automatic mode, then set it to 1130. That's what the manual says. So you want to turn on final at 250 kilometers an hour. That's the maximum allowed speed with flaps fully down. Still turning that wheel. On final, you want something like 220 kilometers an hour. Okay, we're on final. Raise the nose a bit to slow down to 20 and adjust the throttle. Keep us on the glide slope. Passing the threshold, you want 190 kilometers an hour. That also depends on the weight of your aircraft. And then you cut the throttle and keep it off the ground, slowly raising the nose, assuming that 3-point position. Cut the throttle. And now I'm looking at where the horizon intersects canopy. We're down, stick fully back, and be prepared to apply quick bursts of rudder if the nose starts moving left or right. Don't keep the rudder there, just one quick burst. Dance on the rudder. Wait until the aircraft slows down before you start applying brakes, and even then be careful with that. Even though the center of gravity is far behind the wheels, and it's not very likely that you will nose over. Not like in a Spitfire, let's say, but still the manual says be very careful with that. So we stopped. What do? We raise the flaps. We unlock the tail wheel. And set the propeller to manual, 12 o'clock. And of course, because we're on the ground, we open the radiators. Let's taxi back to our parking position. We add a bit of power, 1000 RPM, then we can throttle back, gently tap the brakes to get the nose moving, raising the flaps as we speak. See, if I apply full rudder, it doesn't really do anything, so we need those gentle taps on the brake. And then also to counteract and stop the movement. You want to taxi like not straight, but you want to make S-turns because that big fat nose is blocking your view. You don't want to run anyone over. Okay, let's say we're here. The ground crew is smiling because they know we scored 2 victories. Okay, let's stop here. Before we stop the engine, we turn off all systems that are not needed. In our case, the radio. Let's turn off the oxygen too. Stick back because we increase power to 1900 RPM to clean the spark plugs that may have fouled because of the low RPM during taxiing. Okay, and then pull that lever, increase the throttle to get some fuel into the cylinders before it stops so that it starts more easily next time. And when the propeller stops, we turn off the magnetos. We can release the brakes, let go of the stick, all good. And we turn off the generator, fuel pump, ignition, and the battery. Oh, and the MW50. We open the canopy and we can go to the commander's hut and tell him all about the 2 B-24s that we just shut down. I'll be very happy. Okay, that's it. I know it's a bit daunting and it sounds difficult. Lots of things are happening in a very short amount of time, but with a little practice, you'll get the hang of it. And I hope you will be able to use what you learned today when you fly my Jagdflieger 109 campaign. Alright, thanks a lot for your attention. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit like or comment and subscribe. That helps a lot with the channel, so I would appreciate that. So thanks again and stay tuned. See ya.